before this lockdown began, we also organized Baithaks, wherein we celebrated the artistic works of our poets, writers, and music directors. Till date, we have organized Baithaks on Sahib Ludhianvi, Mirza Ghalib, Faiz Ahmed Faiz, Gulzar Saab, Shiv Kumar Batalvi, Adi Burman, and many other poets. During the lockdown, the creative inputs and energies did not dampen. Life always finds its way, and so do arts and artists. We went online, and since then, as we do not have any barriers of distance, or our outreach has increased, and every time we have an online session at via the Zoom thing, we have members joining us from all over India and even from all over the globe. हमारे पास जो ऑडियंस होती है वो पाकिस्तान से, अमेरिका से, लंदन से, मलेशिया से और इनफैक्ट टोक्यो से भी हमें लोगों ने ज्वाइन किया था. और आज भी, as you all know, we have around 87, 88 people, I believe. Today is a special day. आप सबको पता है, मुझे दोबारा बताने की जरूरत नहीं है कि स्पेशल क्या है आज का दिन. And because of that, we also have a very special session for you. 6 fearless and wonderfully creative writers are joining us today for stories of danger, evil, and murder. The icing on the cake, for cake there must be, is a special mystery guest who will unveil herself and tales. She's hiding behind that book now, but she will come out of that veil. This collection is quite a departure for the writers who are Bulbul Sharma, Paro Anand, Udipana Goswami, Mitra Fukan, Pratyaksha, and of course, our mystery guest. They are going to be in conversation with Preeti Gill. So get set for a rollicking, centered around murder. By the point of my thumbs, this way comes. So over to Preeti now, and to all our wonderful writers. Here's to murder.
Yes.
Yeah, cheers. With water, cheers. Thank you.
Cheers to murder.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Guru Pratap, for that introduction and leading us onto this path of crime and crimes of passion. So this is a book of murder stories, and it's by women writers who don't usually write crime fiction. That was what we started out to do. And what we did was to get 8 women, 8 fabulous writers, and 8 very unusual stories that actually resulted from this project when we began. The stories have been called chilling, horrific, morbidly fascinating. And I think in the book's blurb itself, it says that this is a steaming witch's cauldron of stories that should keep you riveted. So this is what I hope we will do, try to keep you riveted through this evening. Right in the beginning, I will call Paro because that's how we first began to think about this anthology. We were sitting at an airport and she's my partner in crime anthology. So I'm going to leave it to Paro now to come in and to tell us how this whole idea came about, how it germinated. Paro?
Thank you, Preeti, and a very happy birthday. Thank you to Maja House and Guru Pratap for putting all of this together. So we were sitting at the Guwahati airport, coming back from the Shillong Literature Festival. Our flight was late, of course. And Preeti had just started out as a literary agent. So she said, Paro, I'm not doing children's literature and that's what you write. Have you written anything for adults? And I said, well, there's this one story. And it was the one single story that I'd written one day many years earlier. I'd had a fight with my husband. I was so angry with him. He felt like, you know, like really mad. And so I went for a walk, which I often do. I walked the story out. I walked about 9 kilometers in Delhi. I was exhausted. I sat in a coffee shop, drinking coffee and pulled out my notebook which I always had with me and started writing about a woman who wants to kill her husband. My husband is safe and sound and still with me. I think this story was a lifesaver, literally.
Yeah, and so from that one conversation, this entire idea actually germinated, and we started thinking about, so what should this anthology have? Of course, we wanted to get women writers, and we also wanted to get women who had not written in this genre before. But also, should we keep it to the domestic sphere? Is that what women crime writers do? Write about crimes that happen in the home, crimes that happen in the bedroom, rather than on dark alleyways, with villains and heroes and so on. So is that what women are good at doing? Vinita, do you want to come in on that? You're the mystery guest. Take the book off.
Yeah.
Well, I was quite clear that I didn't want to write a story that had to do about the house or had to do about homemakers or anything like that. I said, well, if we're really going to do this genre, then let's do it. Let's show the boys our chops. So I chose a setting which was a slum in Mumbai. I chose a character who was neither male nor female. His sister is a eunuch, and the story is told from her point of view. And I had a whole lot of fun.
Actually, what I did also do when I was looking through the book again was to just sort of mark out certain lines which I really liked. I mean, I like lots of lines in the stories that you all have given, but I thought maybe this would be something that might be also interesting for readers or for potential readers to listen to. So in yours, Vinita, you say, because random kindness is sometimes necessary.
That's one of the lines I live by. There have been so many times in my life where a random act of kindness has touched me so deeply. And in a world that's spinning out of control, where, look at the times that we live in, they're so dystopian. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or day after. A tiny little act of kindness is actually the only thing we can do any longer because we have no control of the larger narrative. And for me, even when you write crime stories, maybe the balance to a large crime is not a large act. Maybe the balance to acts of crime are tiny acts of kindness that seed humanity back. So it is a line of philosophy that I believe in very, very deeply.
Yeah, I think it's a lovely line because it actually, I mean, even in the days that we are going through now, at present, for example, going through this terrible, terrible pandemic time and seeing these mass of migrants continuously walking our roads, I am hoping that it is random acts of kindness that will actually help because, of course, the government is doing its bit and each other agency is also trying to do its bit, but I do hope that it is some philosophy of this kind that actually makes the difference. And I don't know, that's an image that always stays with me. So I don't know why, but I've just sort of pulled it out here again. Udipana, can I go to you next? I know that you have to leave soon, so I quickly want to catch you and get you to tell us a little bit about the story because it's so unique. You've actually tried to I mean, there is this old folk tale which is so much a part of Assam and it's the traditions that come out of oral storytelling as well. It's been used in films as well, and I remember a particular film just a few years back which was completely stunning. So tell us a little bit about your story, the way you've used this folk tale in it, and again I will read out a line to you later.
Okay. First of all, happy birthday again. Thanks for organizing this. About the folktale, I'm so glad you brought that up because that is like the heart of the story. And that is also something, it's the character of Tejimola. The story is built around Tejimola. For those of the viewers who do not know, it's about this girl who was murdered by her stepmother and crushed in the mortar, and then she keeps coming back to life, right? She rejuvenates, she becomes a flower, she becomes a creeper, she becomes a fruit, and finally she regains a human form. But for me, this is the quintessential feminist tale, how women always survive, right? So I see Tejimola in my life, I see Tejimola in the lives of so many women who are every day they are facing trauma and overcoming, so many different kinds of difficulties, challenges in their lives. So Tejimola has always been with me. And then the protagonist of this tale, Dino. He's also been with me for a long, long time, and I was, I was working on this story for a while when Preeti approached me, and then suddenly, after my conversation with her, the story took a very different turn. It wasn't supposed to be about murder at all. So, and it's thanks to Preeti, it took this turn, but I am working on developing the story into a novel. Again, thanks to Preeti's inputs.
Wonderful.
So, you've been wonderful to my writing life, Preeti.
No, that's good.
Yeah.
Because the lines that I was referring to, which are really lovely actually, right in the beginning of the story, the flowers seemed alive, articulate, about to break into a tale of tormented love or hate. Or perhaps how love and hate are so often intertwined in our lives. So does murder come out of that?
Yes, I think it does. At least, the temptation to sometimes. But like Paro said, sometimes we write it off, sometimes we run it off. But I think that's where it comes from, and it's all about how you control your impulses, I feel, because there's so much evil in this world, like evil, not just, women sitting together plotting evil, but real evil happening every day. And like you said, it's evil that we allow these people to be walking thousands of miles without any help. So there is darkness, there is evil, but in spite of all of that, there is rejuvenation. And that's what drives my writing, my scholarship, my feminist scholarship, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, of course, I've always been reading crime, a lot of it, and loving, especially Nordic noir and the gorier and more violent, the better. It's obviously satiating something. Not happy, but yeah, it's there. So, Mitra, why do you think we read crime? I mean, you write crime, but why do you also read this? What is this desire?
Yeah, so first of all, again, happy birthday, Preeti, and it's lovely to be on a panel with murder writers. I never thought this would happen, but it has, and it's really nice. So yes, I think, actually, I don't know about the others, but I never thought that I would be writing a crime story as such. Though in my writings, there's a lot of deaths, but they are not crime as such. The deaths happen in different ways. They're criminal in a larger way. I mean, that should not have happened. They're criminal in a different way, and they evoke maybe the same kind of responses that a murder would in the onlookers. When you asked me to write about a murder story,
I think you need to be louder. Everybody needs to be louder, is what I'm getting over there.
Okay, now if I'm nearer, can you hear? Yeah. So, and then kind of it was very exciting. And to read murder stories, I have been reading for ever since I can remember as a child, Agatha Christie and so on. And it satisfies that need, who done it? And I think it's a skill we need to develop as writers of other genres also, to take the story forward, to find out what's happening next. So as a writer as well, to write this crime story, that thrilling aspect, so that it should be a page turner. People, that's a skill one needs to develop if one has it. Mine was a short story. If it was a novel, it would be, I think, difficult to sustain that pace. But it's a skill, I think, that could be very useful. And so when I read murder stories, when I read crime stories, that always kind of strikes me that, my God, they're making me turn the page just the other day I read a book till 4 a.m. because I couldn't keep down, and it was a murder story, Murder in the East by Abir Mukherjee. So that's the kind of skill I wish I had. That's the kind of thing that I love as a reader. And that's the kind of thing I would like to incorporate into all my writing, not just murder stories.
Yeah, but I think you have a loyal readership in any case, Mitra. So, and the fact that you actually, I think the fact that everybody here has managed to do a murder story is
Murder
like literally
story.
on command. That now we need this for this
Yeah.
anthology is quite amazing. Bulbul, I know that after this one, after this story that you gave for this anthology, then you've done 2 full-fledged novels about murder in very unlikely places, I must say. So whether it's an old age home or it's Shimla, I mean, really unlikely spots. So tell us about that. How did you decide that this was the new thing or this was the new passion now?
Well, Preeti, first of all, happy birthday.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Maja House, for organizing this. Wonderful. Well, you shouldn't ask me this question because you're the one who led me on this path of crime. I mean, if I'm ever sort of hanged or, jailed for life, I'll say it was Preeti who started it all. Because remember, we Murder the Happy Home for Aged was something we discussed, and then I wrote that.
Yeah.
And then Murder in Simla was something I'd planned a long time ago. And you know how things, all writers here will agree that you have things stored somewhere, and suddenly this is the right time to bring it out and write about it. So that's how my murder.
Yeah, because I mean, I think at least I've always sort of associated you with these really charming, lovely stories, lovely descriptions of hill towns and close-knit families, all the aunts and so on, and it's really been delightful. And then of course here too you have the close-knit family, you have a wedding, but in the wedding there is death lurking.
But I actually quite enjoy this, like Vinita said, the random act of kindness. I actually am fascinated by this random acts of cruelty which suddenly happen, and it suddenly pushes the person over the edge. I worked for 2 years at Tihar Jail, with women prisoners, and a lot of them were wonderful, quiet, what in India is called motherly ladies, but they had all were there for murder, because there was that one thing that they said, okay, this is enough, and I'm not going to take this anymore, and it pushed them forward. So that's why this domestic crime is something that I find fascinating, because when you on the surface everything is beautiful, charming, at a wedding everybody's happy, everybody's singing songs, wearing lovely clothes, but there must be some undercurrents of darkness, and I love that. I want to explore that.
Yeah, I think this sort of the violence of everyday life. So I mean, I think for women, I mean, I don't know what I ask you. So do you think that it's much more present for women as women writers, that we seem to perceive the everyday violence, the casualness of violence much more than men writers would probably see it, when men crime writers need to actually create this entire world of darkness around them, but we can find it in really everyday, very small instances that happen, and which we seem to be very sensitive to, or that you can actually see and understand. Do you think that's a woman thing? Pratyaksha, do you want to take that question?
Yeah, sorry. First of all, happy birthday with this. When I was
Thank you.
Last time, so this kulhad with chilled water will do, I guess, for now. Yeah, so what did you ask really?
I was asking that, do you think that, so men, you always see men crime writers creating this, this entire world outside, the outside world of darkness, where the hero and the villain or the criminal or whatever is operating. They need to have this hero figure, may not be terribly heroic looking, might be a drunkard, might be whatever, but definitely the hero. And I feel that women often don't need that, because there is a certain casualness to the violence that we see in our everyday lives as women. Do you think that?
Yeah,
is that something
true.
that?
Yeah, there's certain things that happen around us all the time. And I think many women in India, they do not even look at it as if it's a violence. It's such accepted thing in the normal routine of life. and they accept it. It happens all the time. You know, you talk to all these the helps that we have, and they'll say husband ne maar diya, and you'll say why you're not reacting or doing something about it, and she'll say ki wo to mera aadmi hai, so he's got a right to do it. So we have this funny, you know, this inbuilt conditioning in our heads, and I think even women not of that economic class, but also in a higher class, they accept it more easily. But even when I was writing the crime story that you made me do it, you know, the first instance, I was thinking maybe I should write, you know, this physical the thriller, running around and chasing, and you know, the typical murder, gore, blood. And then I thought of my the childhood memories of reading Agatha Christie, and you know, feeling so happy because in those books, murder is not violent, it's not brutal. You know, somebody there's arsenic poisoning or something, and people die very sweetly, very very innocently. And all the memory I have of Agatha Christie is those rainy afternoons you're sitting tucked up in your sofa or something, and you're reading a book and feeling very happy at all the murders that are happening. And you know, Miss Marple, Hercule Poirot will just go easily. So all the investigation is mostly cerebral, mental, rather than the physical thing that I think most maybe men do. But even I am remembering now The Honorable Schoolboy by John Le Carre, which is again a very cerebral and very different sort of spy story. So anyway, now I'm digressing and going to my story somehow. But it was, you know, I started writing a ghost story, part ghost, part murder, part, you know, all this nightmare and stuff. And then I said, no, I should go back to Agatha Christie and write a whodunit, enjoy writing it. So again, in my story also, it's something that is happening inside the house. You know, a next door neighbor, you don't know whether, whenever we see anybody, you know, the criminals, and you look at them and see their face, and you feel they are just like, they look so ordinary.
Yeah.
Something is going on inside their head, which is not ordinary at all.
Yes.
So the psychological, whatever happening inside your head, which makes you do things like that, is something.
Yeah.
But anyway, I can't really define it with, you know, a gender angle as such, because there are women who've done awful, brutal murders as well.
I had a point to make. That I think what's very special about She Chose to Kill collection is that these are stories that I think could only have been written by women.
Right.
And I think that's what makes this book quite unique.
Yeah, because when we first talked about it, we thought that we would keep everything in the domestic sphere, meaning you would kill off a husband, a partner, sibling, something like that. But then, yeah, it didn't stay within that, and there are stories which go beyond that, including some of the ones which we have here, as well as Manjula and Dennis, who are not here today. So yeah, so I wanted to ask anybody who wants to take this on, because of course it's leading from what all of you are saying, that this heart of darkness that we are all trying to explore through this, you know, through crime or through murder, when we're trying to write this, is it in your head, or is it in the locale, or is it in the characters that you're building? And especially for women, where is this coming from?
I mean, there are
books like, for example, this thing that did really well recently, the what is it called? The thing that had done the film also, which did really well recently, which was a domestic, relationship. Huh? Sorry.
Thapar.
Huh.
Thapar.
The English one. One was the girl on the train, and then the other one.
Well,
so, you know, so things like that, which are actually just a relationship which goes so bad, and then something happens. So it's in your head, or it's just, you know, your circumstances, or what is it? What is it that makes you? What is the trigger?
Can I just respond to that? And I want to respond because I'd like to also respond to your earlier thought of women and crime and safety. You know, a man who goes searching for adventure, a hero, steps across lines to find danger. Women don't do that. Women have danger around them all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, look at us in our own everyday lives. You know, to what a degree you have to keep your antenna up. If you step into an auto rickshaw, you're checking to see if the guy's adjusting his rearview mirror to look at you. So women live with a great sense of insecurity, and they are unsafe. They're unsafe in their very own homes. So I think when women sit down to write, the kind of danger that we create is very different, because we have a very different sense of danger living in the world the way that we do as women. That's one part of what we bring to the process of putting stuff together. And certainly we all have our fascinations with different backdrops and settings. For example, I chose a slum. Whatever backdrop and setting we bring, as Paru said, I think there's something uniquely female about the gaze we bring to danger, and the gaze we bring to killing, and the gaze that I think we bring to a sense of justice as well. And that's why I'm also very fond of the stories in this book, because I related to them, and I'm sure any woman who reads them feels that connection, because this is our way of viewing the world, or making black and white and gray respond to ourselves.
Yeah, the book, film, and the book I was referring to earlier is Gone Girl, which we have all, I think, read or seen or whatever, you know. So that the kind of suddenness of that thing and how quickly it goes bad, and with what, you know, barbaric cruelty it goes bad, all of that. And so where is this treacherous kind of terrain, like you said, Vanita, also just now, that basically we treat women, I think, would treat it differently, because it's also a lot to do with inside your own head and what you are already conditioned to see, and perhaps
I
you're
just
seeing
want to
it
see
like
them.
that.
I don't know why it's coming.
Yeah, can I say something?
Let's go left, right.
Oh, hello.
Yes, Mitra.
Left, right.
Yes.
And if I want to comment,
and it is also a sense of kind of a betrayal. Hello.
Everybody else should turn off their sound, please.
We chat only. People writing down.
Yeah.
Bejoya ji should probably just turn off their mic.
So where do I chat?
With those dots. That's the dot. Go
Please
again.
just switch off your mics, everybody,
Dots
except
were
the
here. Press here
panel.
only.
Yeah, Mitra, sorry.
Yeah. So in my story, it was a question of a sense of betrayal, because the person who did the murder, she was promised something, and because the circumstances changed, she felt she was betrayed, and she did have other options, but she chose to just kill the person and move on with her life. But hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it can be the circumstances that incite you to do something that also in a split second you don't think of it, you don't really plan it through in that way, in which I find that when men are writing, the murderer plans and does it. They usually plan it in a long-winded kind of a way, and then there's a lot of technicalities involved about, you know, the kind of guns they are using, the kind of poisons they are using, and so on. But the woman is doing it, maybe, I feel, that with the means readily available to her, what she can find in the domestic sphere or in the sphere right near her, which and that I think is also a very chilling thing, that some ordinary thing, something like a pan, can become so deadly, can be used to kill somebody, that also in full view of an entire auditorium of people, and nobody had a clue what was happening. So I think these are the things that are chilling about these stories, because it's not as if people have gone out and used sophisticated means to kill. It is with whatever is at hand, and I think that is because the trigger has made somebody so angry, or so a feeling of, I just can't go on with this kind of a thing, I have to, you know, do something. So that I think is chilling about these stories, and that may be a kind of a thing that when women write about murders, they do it. That's what I thought when I read these stories.
I think what Mitra is saying is that when women commit murder, it's more an emotional.
Talk louder.
It is an emotional an impulsive reaction to certain situations. So their murder, the committing of murder is more emotional rather than very cold-blooded, calculated, planned.
Often.
Yeah.
I wouldn't totally say that, you know. But it's also the quality of the mystery, whether you're doing a spur of the moment killing or you're doing a puzzle box, you know, an elaborate puzzle box mystery. It's what you're choosing to do as a writer. I think that has so much to do with women and their particular style of killing. I think our circumstances as women make us go for a particular kind of killing, which is our social circumstances. Women can be cold-blooded and planned murderers as well.
I think
you can do both.
My chick planned it.
You can plan and take a long time for revenge.
Yes, in your story, long time.
Yeah, mine too.
Yeah, Bulbul's story, of course, the woman was like planning forever, no?
Yeah.
No, but she wasn't really planning. When she saw him again, she realized, but so it was planned then. But she hated him all her life, obviously.
Yeah.
But so it was both. What Mitra is saying, it was both a crime of passion, and yet it was it was planned meticulously.
So I pulled out this line from your story about Banno Bua, that she had been widowed at a very young age, and she probably had to learn to behave like all the other widows, older widows in the family. She must have erased her real self bit by bit to blend in with the family till she forgot she was ever a carefree young woman. So does it begin there? This whole thing of, there's resentment. Huge resentment.
It's always simmering. And unfortunately, when she's actually trying to come out and the family helps her a lot, Soni helps her, is when this man appears again in her life. So, she goes back. She slides back again into that and she realizes what has been done to her just when she was coming out of the darkness.
I think because of all this violence that is around us, you talked about the heart of darkness earlier, Preeti. It's everywhere around us, right? We are in that heart, right? We are within it. And because of that, because we have seen so much violence in our life, so much pain, I think women react in a different way to pain, right? So my own writing usually takes off not just from the personal violence that I have faced, and some of you know about that, right? So that is something that I draw on a lot, but also the political violence that I saw growing up. And like you all know how the Northeast has been a conflict for so long now, and what that has done to the society there. It's criminalized the society, brutalized people. To see, people just killing each other in the name of ethnicity, in the name of religion. We see that every day now. Just recently, you saw that in Delhi, right? So that happens. We see that. We see violence all around us. But what makes women's responses unique, I think, is because we are in that heart of darkness. Within that, we are kind of circumscribed by that darkness. And it's as much as our own experiences as the way that we react to those, to pain, to violence, to evil. I think that informs our writing as well.
And the other thing that's interesting, like maybe we can start with Paro, because see, Paro, the thing is that all of you are also working with many other. So for you, for example, you've been doing a lot of work with children that have come out of conflict, some of the stuff that Udipana has just mentioned. So whether it's Kashmir, Northeast, whatever. And Bulbul also has been working with, special children with special abilities. So what does that bring to your writing? So how do the two mesh in, or does that make you, not necessarily just to do with the murder story that is over here, but generally your writing?
For me, very much. It always informs my writing. I think it has brought about a greater empathy and a greater seeing of the truth. So whereas I started out, when I started writing, was to write, sort of more fantasy, made up stories. But I found the truth and the reality rather so compelling that I started writing that more. And I think working with young people growing up in very difficult we have, I have the empathy as one of the things that comes out very strongly.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that for each one of you, because there are so many other areas that you're also working in, apart from the fact of being, just fiction writers, or I mean, Udipana, you've been working with a lot of, you've been doing non-fiction writing as well. And I guess at some point also your poetry as well as your, your book of short stories informs, because I mean, it has that kind of, the kind of areas sort of overlap, because you're also bringing a lot of what you read in your other life into your fiction writing. And
आज तो पुराना हिसाब किताब में लिखो हिसाब, फिर कल से वो शुरू करना।
Vijaya,
फिर साइड में मैंने रखा ड्यूटीज।
Vijaya, please switch off your audio. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Preeti ji, I'm trying, but then there are 3 people who are not muting themselves, and I am unable to mute them.
Yeah,
it's
I think
Vijaya,
please.
it's Dhruba, and it's Rita.
Vijaya, I think this is quite an interesting, surreal kind of thing, with Vijaya's voice coming in.
Maybe someone can call them on the telephone and let them know.
It's okay. Chalo, tell us. Dipana, you were talking. Sorry.
Yes. So we were talking about violence, right? And that is what I think that's defined my life, that's defined my writing, and that is what informed this story as well. But as a scholar, as a feminist scholar, I study sisterhood, empathy. I write about that myself. I write about that in my non-fiction as well. And I think we were talking about empathy just a few moments back, and that is something that women, because of our circumstances, because of how much how much violence and pain we see in our lives, everyday lives, I think we are more attuned to empathy. We are more capable of empathy and sisterhood. And from my own life, I know that it's sisterhood. It's the the bonding that I had with other women who have been either in similar situations as me, or who have who just have that empathy, who have helped me through all the challenges in life. And that is also something that I always try to foreground in my writing as well. And I'm not saying that men are not, capable of empathy, but it's more, it comes more naturally to women because of our circumstances, right? It's not to exclude men who are empathetic. I'm not saying, but, and again, it's not about being a man or a woman, it's about gender. As a gender studies scholar, I should know that. It's the kind of violence that we face in our life, the kind of the kind of challenges we face and how we overcome them in our lives. For instance, you were talking about my nonfiction writing. I had this piece recently about my experience with abuse and how sisterhood, kind of this friend I had, how she helped me through all of this and how I'm coping with it. And one of the responses I had from my editor was that she hadn't seen sympathy for the abuser in writings by survivors of abuse. And I don't know if it was sympathy, but I definitely think that as women, we are capable of looking beyond our own circumstances and into other people's lives, I think. And that is also because, I guess, as women, we are taught to do that, right? We're conditioned to do that. And so it comes more naturally to us.
What do you think, Paro?
What I'm thinking is that a lot of this conversation holds true for a lot of my other writing. Not so much for this one, because I think this one is just pure, because of the mind space that I was in, that I don't think there's that softness, the empathy, sympathy, or any of that in my story.
It never comes on.
Vijaya, switch off.
Hi.
Switch off your audio, Vijaya.
Hi.
There you are.
Fantastic discussion. Really loving it.
Yeah, Preeti. Yeah, Preeti.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'd like to just something that happened very recently during this lockdown about the ordinariness of the triggers that provoke somebody to violence. There's an apartment complex near my house, and it's all very middle class and middle-aged people living there, and people who would say that, you know, the very kind of mild and so on. But as I was doing my evening walk that evening, I heard a lot of shouting coming from one particular flat. It was coming down because it was so quiet all around. And then I realized that, you know, to cut a long story short, I stood there and I just eavesdropped. And the shouts were getting, and there were sounds of things breaking and all, you know, crockery being thrown around and all that.
Oh,
and
God.
these were, I knew those people, I would see them sometimes. They were very, you wouldn't think that anybody would throw crockery. What happened was that, you know, we were not getting fish, fresh fish. And this was about day 10 or so of the lockdown. And it was the last, apparently there were 3 or 5.
I don't know how to do it.
And there was one odd, two, and one odd. And the wife ate it, apparently. Instead of giving it, I mean, this is the husband, so you had it, which is normally what is done in films and in books and in so many of our writings, that you take it. I mean, it's yours, and maybe he would give her a little piece, but instead she ate it herself. From what I could
wow, good for her.
You can't imagine. And it was, I thought it was totally out of proportion to what, and you know, there were things breaking. Tell you, they live on the 7th floor. I was down there and I could hear it all clearly. And there were people collecting and looking what's happening and all that. And you know, the fight went on and on and on. And it went back to the time when he was a Jamai, son-in-law, in the father-in-law's place. And even there, he's never given the best fish.
Oh dear.
It's always the father-in-law or the you know, the darling daughter who's come, and he has been pretending not to notice all these years, but now it's too much because you have eaten that last fish, and God knows when we'll get fish again. That's the trigger, and it could easily have led to murder. I was thinking, you know, the intensity of that passions that were there. Then I could hear somebody went that side and rang the bell. So then they calmed down. But then, I mean, you know, that's the kind of thing. Suddenly there's a trigger. Suddenly everything becomes too much to bear. And then suddenly you think, I mean, if they had not had this maybe social conditioning, if there had been a weapon or something, one of them might have killed the other, who knows.
What fun, yeah. There's your story.
It made my day, actually.
Yeah.
Can I go back to something Udipana was saying?
Yeah.
Udipana was talking to the sisterhood, and I must say that the reason I said yes to doing this book was because of the sisterhood, because it was going to be with a bunch of other women. And the sisterhood is always, I have found my greatest support, my strength from other women. And I was like, wow, we're doing a book together, lots of women, yes. So the reason I said yes really was the sisterhood who we have here today.
Preeti, may I share an art, you know, I was doing an art workshop with an NGO, and this, and they're all women who'd sort of been in prison for a while. And this very mild, gentle girl, she'd always paint, and she'd write Shravan Kumar at the bottom. So I was a bit surprised. Shravan is not a, you know, girl's name. So finally I asked her, I said, Shravan Kumar kaun hai? She wouldn't answer me. So then I asked the warden later on that why does she write Shravan Kumar? You know, she does beautiful paintings and there's big bold Shravan Kumar written everywhere, spoils it all. She said Shravan Kumar was her husband who she murdered.
Oh goodness.
So every painting she signed her husband's name. So I don't know what went on in her head. It was either guilt, or I was talking to somebody who's a psychiatrist, and she said, no, it wasn't guilt, it was triumph. She wrote,
I like that.
it was sisterhood.
I like that interpretation.
Yeah.
And
That's
I
amazing.
can
Yeah.
attest to it.
All the men watching this, please be scared. Be very, very scared.
If your
I'm
name
already
is Shravan
seeing-
Kumar.
I'm already
I
seeing
can
some
really
people
attest to
saying
how,
this is scary. Okay. That's what I meant when I was saying that the intimate terrain of family and marriage and, you know, relationships and love, is that the most dangerous one that we can tread?
Yes.
Because time after time, this is what seems to be emerging, that it's the intimacy of relationships. And, you know, I mean, these days of lockdown, we've been thrown together in close proximity for way too long.
It's also, Preeti, at least in my story, it is a different kind of intimacy, which is also a family intimacy, though they are not related. It is the intimacy, and which is sometimes thicker than blood. The intimacy of the guru to the student.
Yeah.
So that is, to me, when I conceived this, when it came to me, I thought that was kind of a shocker. How could you do that? But she did it.
So what I'm going to do now is to ask each of you, Pratyaksha, you haven't said a word. Maybe you need to add to that, and then we go into reading.
I was just trying to say something to what Mitra said right now. I think there was some older story of Shamshad Begum and Lata Mangeshkar feud in which she was supposedly fed pan with arsenic or sindoor, I think. So, you know,
Sindoor is the one. Yeah. Sindoor will lose your voice. Yeah.
So
I think we should really do one on domestic violence now, like domestic murder, the one that we initially planned. We should do that.
Preeti, I think we should do murder during the lockdown.
I hope somebody...
Murder in the lockdown?
Murder in the lockdown.
And I hope that Speaking Tiger is also listening somewhere.
Yes.
So in case anybody wants to buy the book, this is what it is. And please go to Amazon and get a copy. It's really fantastic. Yeah. I mean, I like one reviewer that I was reading. Somebody calls themselves I guess it's a woman. She says she's reviewer of odd volumes. And she says, I thoroughly enjoyed this sassy anthology. So I think we all like
nice
description. So can we have some readings now? Who wants to begin?
I will have to jump off in like 10 minutes.
Okay, so you start then, because I know you're sitting very, very far away and in Philadelphia. Thank you very much for joining us. And I know it's very early in the morning. Yeah. Begin. You start. A little bit, just 5 minutes or so.
Yeah.
Just to give us a bit of a flavor.
Okay. So I won't give you a background yet, but we'll talk as we go.
And so loudly.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Is this better?
Yeah.
I can hear.
Better.
Okay. So my story is, of course, Beloved of Flowers. And Preeti read out the first, I read out a couple of lines from there, from the beginning, but I will do it again anyway. As Dino turned to close the rickety iron gate behind him, he felt a drop of something cold fall on the back of his hand. He shuddered. He looked up and realized it was a dewdrop. He felt a strong urge to reach out and touch the tiny drops that he now saw dripping from the translucent petals of the purple flowers overhead. The flowers seemed alive, articulate, and about to break into a tale of tormented love or hate, or perhaps of how love and hate are so often intertwined in our lives. Dino felt a shooting pain in his heart at that bittersweet thought. He made a mental note to use it in the next story he wrote. These last few days, it was as if he had been living from one story to the next. He had wanted to continue writing without a break and not be distracted, but then he had been summoned to the big house. He had walked over the hill and down again, grudgingly, clinging to the broad strap of the cloth bag hanging from his shoulder. His pen and white ream of paper were tucked away in the bag. But here was a new story the flowers were telling him now, if only he could hear it and record it. They were blooming breathlessly on the bare body of the nearly leafless climber that had twisted itself around the iron archway stretching from one concrete pillar to the other on either side of the gate. Dino could not move. He stood there, looking up. Let it be, Kongokai. The gate seems to have grown a mind of its own. Kukumpriya Borwani Baideo's command reached him from the veranda of the house at the end of the driveway. Dino's trance was broken. With one mighty effort, he managed to align the two halves of the gate and fix the L-shaped latch in the middle. He couldn't just leave it open. That would be most unseemly. He folded his hands in greeting as he walked down the short driveway to approach the matriarch of the famous Borua clan of Guwahati. In the early days, after the British left, the family owned nearly half of the land in Guwahati and then some outside the lazily growing city. Till this day, it lived off the land, cultivating some, selling some, and there was more left to spare. Who's going to feed off all that land once the old lady's dead? Tarini often complained. He was Dino's neighbor and now his best friend in the city. Of course, if she had a daughter, I would marry her and look after all the property myself, he would joke. I would take care of that imbecile son of hers too. Dino would smile, but never allow the joke to stretch on. He would wonder about the daughter. As he stood in front of the woman now, it suddenly struck him that she must be hardly 5 feet tall. And yet, Dino always felt small in front of her. He felt that everybody looked small and insignificant in front of her. Everybody except, of course, his elder brother, Sri Sri Dayananda Deva Goswami, the spiritual head of the Borbari Khotra. Kukumpriya Borwani Baideo was his disciple. So this is the first section of the story, and then it goes on to talk about the history that Dino's family had with the with Borwani's family. And then Dino recollects this mysterious daughter who suddenly vanished and nobody talks about her anymore. Nobody knows that she ever existed anymore. And much of this story happens inside Dino's head, really. So even this whole recreating her murder and everything happens in his head. And I won't give it all away, so you'll have to read it to see where it goes. But I will just maybe read out the last few lines from the story here, if I have time, Preeti.
Yeah, sure. 1 more minute.
Yeah,
quickly.
That's all I need. That's all I need. So this is like the very end of the story after everything has happened. Now, Dino felt an electric sense of renewal and rejuvenation as he walked down to Kukumpriya Borwani Baideo's house the next morning. He remembered the many cleansing ceremonies he had witnessed in the Khotra growing up and realized that in some ways he was going through one of them himself. He was, after all, purging his past and cleansing his soul of the dark and dreadful thoughts that had poisoned him to the point of madness. He felt ecstatic and he walked briskly. He was almost at the house now and he stopped short. There was new construction underway. The rickety old iron gate was gone. A small muddy path wide enough for one person to pass by at a time had been left in the center of what used to be the gate earlier. And on either side of this path were 2 deep, gaping holes. Sturdy iron rods embedded in a cement base were sticking out of the holes. The creeper was gone. The flowers were gone. Tejaswini Tejimola was gone. Dino turned around hastily and started walking back. He had to reach the river. And that's how it ends.
Thank you. Well, this is really quite a story.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Udipna. I know that you've got to go and your son has something on now. So,
yeah, I wish I could stay for all the readings, but it was amazing to be with you all. And I hope we can do this again sometime soon, Preeti.
Yes, as soon as we can, we'll go to Bulbul's now, okay? We have to go to Bulbul's place and do this in the terrace.
Yes. Once this is all over, let's hope things
get
back
nice.
normal.
Yeah.
In happier times.
Yes.
Talking of these ritual murders, Vanita, can we go to you now?
Oh, certainly. Waiting for this. Okay.
And what and how did you create Sister at all?
I really don't know, actually. It came partially out of the fact that I was taking Kalaripayattam classes at that time. And there were these couple of women who would do this stuff with sticks. And I'd be looking at them like, oh, you know. And then somehow in my head, they become a eunuch who did Kalaripayattam, dressed in a white sari, white at all times. So it all kind of came together. Okay, so I'm reading the opening of the story. The story is called Sister. Sister hated blood. It stank. The thick coppery stink mingled with the smell of incense and sweating people and thickened the air till it was impossible to breathe. The goat spasmed as blood gushed and spurted from its neck. The head of the goat had rolled away, and it lay watching its own death with eyes that slowly turned to stone. Sister hated blood, but it had to be done. She stepped forward and felt the hot blood being pressed between her brows in the spot where the third eye opened. The most powerful took first blood. 5 years ago, Sister had stepped forward first and no one had stood up to challenge her. The priest dipped both his hands in the blood and smeared his face and torso. A roar went up from the crowd and they began to press forward, eager to be anointed. Sister stepped back, noting with distaste that the hem of her sari was soaked in blood. Her eyes were alert, watching the crowd. The bells rang, the drums played, and the smell of hot blood hung thick in the tiny space. The mess would lie in the temple, rank and stinking until dawn, when the faithful would return to scrub it from the stones. The black granite statue of Kali watched it all with a shocked gaze, eyes wide open to take in all the world. Only Kali was watching as a second sacrifice was made that night. When the priests unlocked the temple in the pale light of morning, a boy lay in the blood at Kali's feet. His arms were stretched above his torso, as if he was prostrating himself before the statue. His head lay beside him, turned away, eyes closed, as if it hadn't been able to bear to watch his death.
Yeah.
That was like plunging into blood.
It was
right
scary.
now.
Oh, really?
Yes. Next. Who's going next? Who's going next?
I'll go.
Yeah, sure, Paro. Yes.
Okay.
But I'm hoping that we're going to get full dramatics now. We must.
So my story is called And Then He Said, and I told you the origins of the story. And then he said, I could kill for you. Wet, wet, she was wet, dripping her freshly showered body onto him. Hers lean torso pressing up against his soft belly. Her long, thick, wet tresses dripping onto his own thinning hair, kissing him wetly. Her warm, wet kisses was what he needed right now. And as always, she knew what he wanted, needed, gave it to him without him even having to ask. She always knew, the way his wife never did, and now never would. She threw her wet towel at him and got ready to leave. He enticed her back into his soft hotel bed. He remembered the first time he met her. She was sitting behind the travel desk and he needed his ticket changed. He'd been at a genuine conference that time. He found her very attractive. He loved the way she laughed, a whole open laugh, a wide smile. He found her crooked, overlapping teeth really attractive, sort of sexy and childlike at the same time. Not that he was out looking for sexy women, of course not. He was a slightly paunchy, slightly balding 40-something then. 8 years later, he still wasn't looking for sexy chicks, just the one. He nuzzled into her now and asked her, "What do I offer you?" She was cuddling him back as he buried his face into her freshly shampooed hair. He repeated his question. "I know what I like about you. Like, not love." That was too big a word. He didn't use it much. "But What do I offer you? He asked. She laughed, turning back towards him, amusement sparkling in her honey brown eyes. You offer me the best shampoo, the softest sheets, and most of all, room service with champagne, no less. That's all. No, there's also that big squishy hug you offer me. She giggled, rubbing his big squashy belly before kissing him on the nose and pulling away. He felt there was something more she was going to say, but she had turned away. She was gone. And he buried himself back into the bed that still held her warmth and her scent, before dragging himself away to a flight back home. So now I'm going to jump much further into the story. She turned to him, pressing up against him, his lips finding his mouth, which was hanging open, more in shock than in lust. I love you, she murmured. I want you. Here, now, he thought, looking around. It was a filthy room, stinking, so far away from his hotel room. It was almost as there were furry, fungusy things creeping all around. I need you to do something for me, she whispered, gently biting his ear the way she knew turned him on. But he wasn't responding. He was taut with tension. You promised me something the other day, remember? He didn't know what she was talking about. You said you could kill for me, remember? Vaguely, he remembered. In the midst of their love-making, he may have said something absurd. You said you could kill for me. I need you to do it now. He didn't quite get what she was saying until the bite on his ear was not sexy, just painful. Ow! You promised. You said you'd kill for me. I need you to do it now. Look, he's fast asleep. He won't put up a fight. He felt the cold blade sharply pressed into his hands. You promised. Do it. The blade pressed in. He felt it break skin. You or him, baby, she said in a voice hard as shards. You or him. The choice is yours. There will be blood tonight.
Oh my God. Scaring the pants.
Do you think we can sleep tonight? Yeah. So right from loneliness and boredom, I mean, where does murder actually emerge from? It could be just anything that spurs you on. So who's next now?
Can I go and do some comic relief now?
Yeah, please. Yes, Bulbul.
Because I'm getting really scared. You know, the lights keep going off in this room.
We'll get ghost stories the next time.
Yeah. Okay. So now a bit of funny murder. Okay. So this is, of course, a family wedding, and there's chaos and there's a lot of happiness. There's singing and everybody's having a great time. And of course, everybody's overeating. The knees are fine, but my digestion is really bad, said Banno Bua, rubbing her stomach gently to demonstrate. She was around 55, behaved like a much older woman, keeping her head covered with her white lace-edged dupatta all the time. But her face was still beautiful, and her large brown eyes darted about restlessly, as if she was always looking for something she'd lost. Banno Bua had strong, melodious voice and was very much in demand at weddings for her repertoire of old folk songs. Soni was not sure how the old lady was related to them, but she liked her best amongst all the relatives who'd come to attend her wedding. Banno Bua helped with the chores quietly and never offered endless advice like the other aunts and uncles. She even helped Bobby with his school project quite happily. She sang naughty songs, she sang happy songs. Don't tell anyone I sang this one, she whispered to Soni, her eyes sparkling. Soni knew that Banno Bua had been widowed at a very young age and had probably had to learn to behave like all the other older widows of the family. She must have trained herself to act like an elderly, sedate woman years ago when she was still quite young. She must have erased her real self bit by bit to blend in with the family till she forgot she was ever a carefree young woman. Nita and Soni urged her one day to wear a colored sari and a pair of pretty pearl earrings, but Banabua shook her head. Never. Not safe for widows to look like parakeets. White protects us, she said, giving them a blank, faraway look. Now for a bit of action. It was the tentwala's assistant who found the body when he was arranging the lights. He was perched on the top step of a ladder propped against the wall, draping the wires to the bars of the window in one of the upstairs bedrooms. And then when he saw a body lying twisted at an odd angle on the carpet next to the bed inside the room. The bed sheets were soaked in blood and it looked as though the body had fallen off the bed. The tentwala's assistant almost fell off the ladder as he turned around to shout to the boys working in the lawns below. And then there was chaos. The house trembled and shook as people ran around shouting and screaming. They tried to get into the room, but it was locked from inside. Then one nephew climbed up the ladder and jumped in through the window. Oh my God, he's dead, he's dead. The nephew shouted to all the other relatives gathered outside the window, and they gave a collective sigh of horror. The poor nephew barely managed to unbolt the door before they all rushed in together to get a good look at the corpse. Manmohanji had been dead for at least 5 hours, the doctor said, shaking his head as if he could not really believe it himself. He was in good health for his age. If this terrible thing had not happened, he could have lived till 90, he said, washing his hands. The body was carried away for a post-mortem on a stretcher draped in the white sheet. The relatives pushed each other to get a better look, and an aunt fainted when she saw the bloodstains. The women wailed, and the children hid behind the door in fear. They had forgotten to switch the music off, and a melodious Shehnai echoed all over the house as everyone talked in excited voices. How did he die?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Can I go next?
Yes, please, yes.
Yeah.
I hope you're getting to see the voluptuous singer.
Oh, yeah. Thereby hangs a tale also. Yes. So this is Poison in the Pan, and I'll just read 2 bits out of it. The beginning. It begins in an auditorium where the murder takes place. The audience, every last man and woman, was engrossed in the recital. All eyes were on the stage. Heads were nodding in appreciation. Hands and feet were beating in time to the rhythm. Every now and again, a simultaneous wah wah would escape their lips, more like a prayer than an exclamation. Kya baat, somebody would breathe as the singer would execute a particularly intricate swoop from one note to another. Rabina looked sideways at Himanshu. He was gazing raptly at Shraddha Devi, she of the luscious curves, quite apparent even through the folds of her magenta and parrot green Banarasi sari. Her coal-lined eyes, glistening mouth, and ample bosom, which at the moment was heaving mesmerizingly, synchronized beautifully with the tans and murtis that she executed. But Prabina didn't mind. She knew it was the oral beauty all around that Himanshu was so immersed in. He probably didn't even notice the singer's physical charms, whereas she, Prabina herself, was very much attuned to the visual. She had to be in her profession. But I shouldn't be looking around like this, she admonished herself. I paid vast sums of money to get these second row seats. Of course, it's all worth it to see Himanshu enjoying himself so much. Now, if only I could do the same. Shraddha Devi was, after all, one of the topmost exponents of her gharana, perhaps the topmost exponent of Thumris and Dadras. It had been difficult to get tickets, for she performed in her hometown only rarely, but she had managed it. Balamwa Paridesiya Mora, Shraddha Devi was crooning. Certainly it sounded very nice, and Prabina hoped that the Balamwa, the beloved, who had gone off, leaving her alone, would return soon. Prabina couldn't quite bring herself to say wah wah though. So then I go a little bit more where things are described on stage. Then I go to about 3 pages down. Though the student was in full flow, Shraddha cut her off midway now to sing, Kaise kate din ratiya balam bin, neend na aaye more ratiya balam bin. How can I get through this day, this night without my beloved? Sleep eludes me at night without my beloved. Her voice was silver, gold, and honey, warm and tender, enticing, seductive. It was, thought Prabina dispassionately, a bedroom voice. Was it just that she was singing these almost erotic songs, or was her temperament like that too? In any case, she had now abandoned all pretense of singing to the audience and was focusing solely on Chaudhary, who's the chief guest. Her smiles, her glances, her body language were all aimed at him. Enjoying it? Asked Himanshu. More than you can imagine, Prabina replied. She's quite something, isn't she? And I don't mean musically, you know. I know what you mean, said Himanshu. There's something not quite, I don't know how to put it. She's seducing that man right under our noses, said Prabina helpfully. Their voices were low whispers, and getting away with it just because she's a famous singer. Yes, I'm enjoying this. Anyway, then I go a bit further. So she continues singing, and she's flirting in full view of everybody with the chief guest, who's a very rich man. Come, Chaudhary Sahab, this is for you, she said. Smiling, she began a tan, a silvery succession of notes that climbed up the scale like an eagle soaring into the blue sky above. Her hand, expressive as her voice, drew arcs that spiraled up, echoing the music. But the unthinkable. Halfway up that tan, Shraddha Devi began to cough. On stage, all eyes swiveled towards her. This was something that should not happen to even a beginner, and how could... The hall full of people sat up, all of them aware suddenly of something gone awry. A top Thumri singer, her tan cut off mid-flow by a cough. Indeed, it was getting worse by the second. The hand that was executing visual music changed course and clutched at her throat instead. Her voice was now flushed, contorted. As they watched, a look of fear, panic suffused it. Her eyes watered and began to pop out. A horrible choking sound came from her, the total antithesis of the music of just a few seconds before. As before their very eyes, she keeled over sideways. She was gasping for breath now, choking and sputtering. The musicians on auto mode kept playing, even as they looked at her with increasing horror. The audience had not yet grasped what was happening as they stared, astonished, at the drama before them. By the way, I really enjoyed writing this gory bit, you know, that I just, and I really don't know how that came to me, but, and I'm sorry, it shows something really bad about me, but I enjoyed it.
Really.
Okay.
And now, Pratyaksha, I can see you're drinking lots of water.
Oh, now it's chai.
Chai, okay. Chaliye, sunaiye.
Oh, my story is Ginny Kalra, I Loved You. So Ginny Kalra is the air hostess, and I'm just reading one little bit from the middle somewhere. My head is splitting open, and someone is hammering relentlessly at my temples. I mumble, stop, stop. My eyelids are glued shut, and I use my fingers to pry them open. What the fuck? The doorbell is ringing. I stagger out and there is a crowd outside. Someone pulls at me and I walk zombie-like into Jenny Kalra's flat, into her tiny bathroom, into the bathtub, into the blood that is everywhere. I scream and black out. Inspector Ruby Ghorpade is very businesslike, very stern, but despite her sternness, she looks like the next door Amma, comfortably fat and rounded, a nose pin on her glob of a nose, and brown twinkling eyes. I had great fun imagining Inspector Ruby Ghorpade. She's like the typical, I visualized her wearing a khaki dress, koala dress, and like that. So tell me, miss, your name first. Elena D'Souza, I mumble. My mouth is full of ash. My eyes hurt. My stomach is a mass of knots. So, Miss Elena D'Souza, tell us, when was the last time you saw the victim? What victim? Jenny Kalra. She is not the Amma next door anymore. Last night, my voice is a whisper. Why did you do it? I concentrate on her bulges. Her uniform is straining at her tummy. The buttons look ready to pop. I'm fascinated by the buttons. In my numb state, I begin to recall the crime films that I have seen. I want to call my lawyer. What lawyer? I do not have any lawyer. They tell me later that I fainted, blacked out. An excess of chocolate, alcohol, and murder can make anyone go round the bend. Potent cocktail, yes. Shock and trauma, the doctor says in a dry monotone. Percy is with me in the hospital. He takes me back to his house. Percy is the next door neighbor. Mrs. Delnas fusses around me. Jamset is nowhere to be seen. Inspector Ghorpade has warned everyone that she will come again soon. Ginny's flat is cordoned off. The door is sealed. I hanker after the rust silk scarf that she had bought for me and the perfume, the purple Davidoff. I had left them on the couch when I had left in a drunken stupor in the wee hours. I am concentrating on the perfume bottle. Both of us had dabbed it on our wrists. The fragrance still lingers. They say Constable Nayak had noticed the smell of the 5-star hotel, Madam G, he had exclaimed. The young lad from the 7th floor had reported. I sleep in Shireen's room. Her body lay in the bathtub. Her throat slit, the blood all over. She lay as if she was sleeping, her limbs arranged properly, her ankles crossed, and her hands folded on her stomach. That was stained red. Obviously, someone had done this to her. That is, slit her throat, stabbed her, and arranged her limbs. The investigation team are leafing through the semi-porn magazines in her bedroom, laughing, cussing salaciously, a vicarious voyeurism coursing through their veins. Inspector Ruby Ghorpade asks, who was her lover? Who was she sleeping around with? Tell me, Elena, you will be saved a lot of trouble. I found my fingerprints all over, on the glass, on the bottle, on the magazine, and the doorknobs, in her bathroom even. I remember the last pee there. I had flushed the cistern, I'd washed my hands, then picked up the hand lotion. I touched the mirror. I know nothing. I tremble and cry. Percy is with me all the time. Jamshed tells me Mrs. Madgaonkar was telling the downstairs neighbor that she'd seen me coming out furtively from Ginny's flat in the morning. When I go up to my flat, I meet her on the landing. She gives me a hostile look. The news has been on the television channels ever since. Ginny Kalra, the beautiful air hostess, murdered brutally in her Matunga flat. Now, this Matunga flat is also something I had to write. And initially I had named the story Murder at Matunga. And then later on I changed it. So something, I've not been to Bombay many times, but Matunga is like stuck in my head. So anyway, this flat is in Matunga. The news has been on the television channels ever since. Ginny Kalra, the beautiful air hostess, murdered brutally in her Matunga flat. They flash her pictures, smiling into the camera with 2 other air hostesses. Some file picture. Another of her pouting selfie and another holidaying in Ibiza. The last 2 taken from her Facebook. They talk about her last status update. Life is so beautiful, I could die. The anchor whispers dramatically. She almost had a premonition of death. A life cut short, a brilliant career snuffed out. Then someone discovers she had changed her relationship status from single to in a relationship. Tell us about the boyfriend then. Inspector Ruby Ghorpade coaxes me. Come on, tell us all you know. This is news to me. She never told me about any boyfriend. I mumble. Really? Then what you talked about the whole night, huh? She's sipping hot tea, and after every sip, she jots down something on her notepad. We talked about her trips and clothes and cosmetics, and she prompts. That's all, I swear. I'm hysterical. Why do you keep asking me questions? I know nothing about how she died. I loved her. I loved her like my sister. I'm sobbing now. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's a proper planet, so you have to guess who did the murder.
That I think some people reveal and some don't till the end. And I hope that all the men who are here, and if they don't read women's crime fiction, then they're really missing out on some very crucial information. And with that, I'm going to call Gurpratap back so that we can get in some audience questions. There have already been a few on the chat. Should we do that now?
Sure.
मैं बोल तो सकता हूँ पर वीडियो मेरा भी ऑफ ही है. चमक साहब ऑन करेंगे.
अच्छा ठीक है. आप जो 2-3 तो came on the chat, maybe you can begin with that and then people can also ask if they raise their hand.
जी जी हाँ. So thank you so much for those wonderful stories. मैंने सारी पढ़ी हैं कहानियाँ पहले, but it was wonderful to have them recited. मैंने अपने वीडियो ऑन तो किया है. Okay, now the house is open for question and answers, and anyone who wants to ask a question to any of these writers hands. और उतनी देर में मैं चैट में से देख लेता हूँ कि किस किस के आए हुए हैं.
There are a couple of good questions there.
हाँ.
I just read one that said, how do you approach your plot? Referencing help.
Yeah.
I wanted to know about how each one of you approached your whodunit plot. And did referencing help?
And did you refer to real cases or stories? Yeah.
Who's going to answer that?
Somebody should take it.
Well, I always like to construct these sort of stories as kind of mystery boxes. There's a little box with a mystery inside it, and you open that and there's another mystery, and you open that and there's another mystery. So when I'm constructing a story like this, I very clearly keep that visual thing in mind of a mystery box opening to another, opening to another, opening to another. And the second visual thing that I keep in mind while constructing is that, you know, a murder story, as a writer, you're constructing 2 levels of narrative. There's a story you want to tell, and there's the experience you want your readers to have, because you don't want them to jump ahead. You only want them to know this much by this point and only this much by that point. So you're writing with a double vision. You're actually writing your story, and you're also keeping an eye on how you're crafting the response of your reader along it so that the end comes as a revelation. So yeah, there's quite a lot of crafting that goes into the...
It does.
Yeah, I agree with you. But I work backwards. I get the person killed, man or woman, and then I work backwards. Because I really, more than the murder, I like to, you know, get the characters, their relationship with each other, and all this sort of little nasty things coming out of their characters and their relationship breaking apart with this murder. So I work backwards.
And also somebody's carrying a catheter in your story.
Yeah. No, yeah, for me, you know, whenever I watch these divas on stage and the kind of exaggerated kind of things that they sometimes do, not always, then when they're doing all these, executing all these difficult things, and I think, what if she gets a heart attack right here? What will happen? So this was something that it's not new. I have sometimes felt that, you know, because it is a very physical thing also, this musical performances. So yes, when I was writing this, somehow I thought I must incorporate this, and it did work. And of course, actually, more than the person murdered, it was the detective who I really put in a lot of thought into her, the detective, and then how she went about it, because she was not part of that circle of musicians. She was an outsider, and that's why she was, I think, better placed to unravel that mystery. So that's how it came to me.
When I wrote my story, I wrote it at, like Vanita said, it was on 2 levels. So one level was the narrative, which was, presented to the reader. And then I had to put something in my own head, because it was a whodunit, and it was to be a surprise murder in the end, a murderer in the end. And I had to put clues, working backwards. So that's how I did. I decided who the murderer would be. And then I put him, little bit by little bit in the beginning or the middle of the story. So it was like writing at 2 levels. Great fun though.
My writing is very, very visceral. I hope you can hear me. I'm getting a notice.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So for me, my writing is very visceral and very instinctive. And so I don't really reference too much. I don't give it a lot of thought in terms of brain work. It's more just from the heart, from the gut, that that my stories come. And as I said, the first run of the story came after a 9-hour walk, and I was like really churning inside with irritation, and bang, the story came out like that. I didn't intellectualize. I often don't intellectualize my story.
I think we have Kishore and
Dr.
Gurupdesh asking also.
Yeah, Chamak sir, could you unmute Kishore Thukralji and start?
So I have unmuted and put on the video Gurupdesh ji, then I'll take on to Kishore ji. First Gurupdesh ji.
Ji.
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yep.
You are.
Loud and clear.
Yeah. My question is to Preeti Gill, and the question is about the title of the book. I know it's a play on the much popular phrase, she stoops to conquer. But in this case, she stoops to kill. Are you ethically kind of considering them wrong?
No.
Are you trying to put a finger on them and saying, well, they are doing something for which they have to go down? Is it?
So the thing is that actually we had another name for the anthology, and then in this case the publisher decided that this would be the name. The name that I was thinking, and I think we all liked also, was Murder, She Wrote. But Murder, She Wrote is so much to do with Agatha Christie that ultimately I think the publishers decided that, let's change it, because there's...
Yeah, this looks like you are pointing a finger at them, that they are doing something unethical.
No, not unethical. I think then they decided that this would be the title, and I think we were all fine with it. Not unethical, because it also says stories of crime and passion. So not unethical, but it was sort of course, foraying into something which is the dark side of our natures.
But she stoops.
Well, I mean, like I said, I'm not taking I'm not even taking responsibility for that title.
Thank you very much.
Anybody else in the group wants to say anything on that? Paro or anybody else wants to say something?
Well, I mean, you always stoop to kill, you have to fall into that base. So I'm okay with it. I think it's a great title.
Yeah, I prefer the one we had earlier, but yeah.
If it's murder, I mean, you're not justifying the murder. I don't think any of us are really justifying it and saying, fine, if the reason is strong enough, go ahead and kill the person. No, none of us are saying that. So I think you do have to stoop to that.
Kishore.
Yeah. Hi, good evening. And I must congratulate you, Preeti, and all the writers who've written for this book, because I happened to read it while I was traveling, and it made fantastic company for me. But there's one thing I wanted to ask. Why is it that these murder stories and crime thrillers, why is it that they are so popular? Is it because there is a murderer lurking somewhere within us, all of us? Or is it because we all fancy ourselves as detectives? Are we deriving some kind of voyeuristic satisfaction from the murder being committed or the murderer being found out? So what is it really that makes them so popular?
I think that, you know, at the end of the day, we are the only storytelling animal. We love our stories. And there's nothing as tantalizing as an unfinished story. You have to know how it ends. Right. And I think murder mystery is the ultimate, oh my God, how does this end hook? You know, it's the ultimate kind of story because that is the primal crime. The first crime is one brother raising his hand against another. So I think it has very deep roots. And mainly it's this, what happened? What happened? How did this end? We can't bear not to know.
It's a kind of a...
What happened next?
What happened next, yeah. And also it's a very kind of a very strong curiosity that keeps you going. Turning the pages, who did, because the crime is the ultimate. It's a murder, it's ultimate. There's nothing beyond that. So then who did this horrible thing? And also not just who, but also why. Why? The motive. The motive is also very important. And I think in all these stories, the motive has been brought out very well indeed.
So my question was...
The curiosity works the other way. Like if you see a writer called Ruth Rendell, she writes from the point of view of the murderer. So there you want to know what he's going to do, you know, how he's going to. So I think it's some like deep-rooted thing in our brains that we just want to know. Kaise hua? I think that's the main.
I think Shruti Mala has a nice question.
Shruti Mala has a question. Is the feminine narrative strong in the murder stories? If so, in what way is this element an added attraction? The feminine narrative.
Well, not in mine. I didn't choose a feminine narrative at all. I chose a character who's a eunuch. So, well, not in mine.
I think if Deepana was here, she would have had something to say on that also, no? Because of that particular folktale. No, Mitra?
Yeah, mine was not consciously a feminine narrative, not consciously. But it so happened that I did not want the usual stereotype male, you know, shambling, cigar smoking and, you know, having addictions and things like that. I wanted a woman detective and who was the antithesis of her partner, who was that, you know, that artistic and musical type. And she was the much more hard-boiled and all. So it was not really, I wouldn't say it's a woman thing, but on the other hand, it also is a woman thing to go against a stereotype like that.
Mine is out and out of feminine thing, except for the dead body who is male.
Putting them in their place, I say, Bulbul.
Yeah.
My story is a female, the victim. The victim is a female, the investigator, the detective is a female. Sadly, the murderer is a man, so I bring in one person inside.
I wanted a serve him right kind of moment. Serves him right.
Achha,
achha. Got it, achha hua.
Remember when we were children, Paro? If you fell down, then your mother would say, "Achha hua." Maine bola tha na, "Achha hua," gir gayi.
Guru Pratap, anything else or should we now?
और तो किसी का question नहीं है. I wanted to ask something कि this was your first attempt at writing thrillers and crime stories, right? So how difficult was it for you? अच्छा नहीं, then how difficult was it for you to move out of the comfort zone?
Well, I've been writing this kind of stuff for a long time. You forget that I also do screenplays. So for television and film, I've been constructing stuff like this. And I don't think it's so much, it's very what comfort zone you've been reading in. I've been reading crime stories forever. So, you know, when you sit down to write, you've actually spent an apprenticeship of 10, 15 years already because you've read so strongly in that. So I don't think it's that difficult to step out into writing this stuff. Certainly it needs a high level of craftsmanship, which when you sit down to do, then you realize, Arey, that Agatha Christie is...
Vinita, sorry to interrupt. Vinita, sorry to interrupt, but there's a dog who's playing dead right behind you. He's It's a victim there.
Actually, Paro, there are 5
That's
dogs.
a part of the story.
So all the strays that we
He's just pretending. Okay?
5.
He just killed me.
Paro, that's another mystery.
5 of them behind me.
What next?
Oh, he's looking like a doll, yeah.
I said, that's another mystery. What next?
You have to see, I'm very carefully in my story skill of human beings. I would never kill off a dog.
No.
Never.
I mean, that doesn't happen in Patal Lok also, yeah.
I loved it, man. I loved that it was all about, okay, look after stray dogs, guys.
Yes, absolutely.
That was the takeaway.
Totally. I think we need to wind up now. We've gone way beyond our time.
पारो जी अगर बता दें कि इनके लिए कितना मुश्किल था to move out of her comfort zone.
Good, Pratap. I was actually outside my comfort zone in my mind space, and the writing brought me back into my comfort zone. I said, ठीक है, लिख लिया, अब हो गया, मुझे ठंडा हो गया.
All right. So I don't think there are any more questions. मैं एक बार check कर लेता हूँ.
No, they are not. They are not. And
Let's really put us back together to write a kind of
COVID stories, COVID murder,
lockdown stories.
See, Preeti ji, there's another one. Arwa Rangwala.
एक question और आ गया है.
Last
question.
I'm just going to ask her to come. Yeah, okay. Yeah, Arwa. Arwa, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear us?
Please be quick.
Yes, I would just like to know. I try to.
Can you be a little close to the mic?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Of course, it's better.
Yes. So I would like to. I'm not a professional writer. I'm an accountant by profession. But yet, sometimes I pick up my paper.
Arwa ji, your sound is not very clear. Could you type your question in the chat thing?
Sure. Okay, I'll do that.
Please do that. पारो जी ये बताइए कि जब तक ये अपना क्वेश्चन लिख रही हैं, आपकी जो कैरेक्टर है आपकी कहानी में, शी इज क्वाइट लाइक लेडी मैकबेथ कि वो इसको मार दो. So at some point, did it come to your mind also? ये तो लेडी मैकबेथ जैसी होती जा रही है.
It's someone who I wanted to be at that moment. But I've always enjoyed playing the witch's role. So when we were doing Macbeth as a dramatization, of course I was one of the 3 witches.
Thank you, all of you very, very much for being here today. And from the far corners, from, Udipana being in Philadelphia, Bulbul is sitting in the hills, and Mitra is in Guwahati, and Benita is sitting in Goa, and we, Pratiksha, you, me, happen to be here in Delhi.
Oh, we are from Amritsar also.
Yes, of course.
How can you forget us?
I'm not. I'm talking about them.
All right.
The writers.
And the concluding note, let's all wish Preeti ji once again a very blissful and a happy birthday.
Yes.
And wish you many, many, many more. And there are lots and lots of wishes from all the participants, for the good wishes to you on your birthday. And we all love you, and we all wish to have all these young, beautiful girls back in Amritsar with their stories.
I think Arva's question needs an whole session.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Preeti ji. Wow, wonderful. Good. God bless you all. God bless you all.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.